And we're live. Happy Thursday, everyone, wherever you are joining us from in the world today. Welcome to another high vibe conversation. I'm your host, Shel Shapiro. With me, as always, are the lovely high vibe women, minus one who's a little bit under the weather, and we will hold space for her. Today, we are here to talk about owning your story. Not really sure where we're going to go down the rabbit hole with these conversations because stories are ever present, and they're always changing, right? Especially as we work through our own stuff, as we heal ourselves and work through trauma and undo things and unlearn our lessons of the past and our experiences, our stories can change, right? So we might all have very similar stories and similar experiences, but the way that we share these stories, the way that other people experience them, and the way that they evolve as we evolve keeps changing. So when it comes to owning our stories, I'm going to start with Stina on this one. What's coming up for you when you hear owning your story?
Oh, you always leave me for last now. So now I have to just give you my fresh, raw thoughts. It's funny because what I've been learning about myself, particularly in like my human design, really emphasizes like me sharing stories and like being a role model, but not necessarily in like a not a role like, I always thought of role models as a kid as, like, some like, a star, a celebrity, somebody that, like, you look up to, and I think that sometimes our role models are just somebody else that is showing you a different way to do something. Somebody else that's, like, opening your mind to another possibility or, challenging where you're at, just by being themselves, just by, like, living their lives. So for me, owning my story most recently is about trusting that my story is actually what will teach people the things that I have to share with them. And and that like one of my top strengths in like the strengths finder, actually the top strength is learning. So I remember taking that test and being like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like all the other strengths seem very like directly applicable to something, like being good at analyzing things. Like that's something you can like do in a job. And what's some other ones like woo, being able to woo people. And I'm like learning, like what do you do with learning? Because learning to me feels almost selfish. Like I'm taking in things, I'm digesting them, I'm learning all of these things. But my stories that I have shared and stories that I am sharing are all about like bringing people along for the learning process. And I'm feeling kind of this shift where, like, Linda and I have talked about this before. I don't usually like to share things as I'm going through them because it feels messy, it feels unfinished. It's very vulnerable to do that. And I think part of that is because I've had this feeling like I have to tell the whole story in order to like own it. And I'm feeling this shift, and I think again part of this is my human design where like around 28 to 30 years I have this part of my design where I make a shift from going through all of the stuff to going it's called going up on the roof. So it's like you go up and you look out and you have this new perspective and you can observe your own stories and experiences and other people's stories and experiences. And it's like the observation is what is so powerful, sharing observations. um so that's where I'm at right now, is like making this shift from, oh, it's so uncomfortable to share things while I'm going through them and while I'm learning them. And what if it's not finished? And what if it's not perfect? And what if it's not the whole story? To realizing that there's so much value in owning the story that I'm living right now, not just the one that I can kind of package up nice and neat from my past and say, like, here's what happened, kind of that fairy tale happily ever after kind of like being able to wrap it all up with a nice little bow. And just recognizing that, like, this is the story. I'm in the story. I'm writing the story. I'm living the story. And so it feels a little like wobbly or like uncomfortable, like getting your sea legs in like a new way to experience my story and kind of challenge myself to just share what I'm learning. Just share, this is what I'm learning, and appreciate the power of that. Appreciate the power of just learning, just being the student. And then, like, apparently somehow that just teaches other people things. And I have evidence of this from the past. But I think it feels a little bit foreign because I typically think of teaching as like the teacher, the student, this hierarchy, instead of let's learn together. What are you learning? I'm curious about this. What are you curious about? And just having this exciting, like, co-creation, collaboration, relationship with other people, where we don't have that, where we have more of a like equal exchange and like friendship in learning. So that's what's coming up for me.
Thank you for sharing. So many things are processing for me right now. One of the things that you said was about being uncomfortable sharing while you're going through something. And this reminds me of like when I'm going through something, and it depends who's around me. That kind of dictates who I want to share, how much I want to share, what part of the story do they get, and whether they get all of it or just like little snippets. And it's weird for me, it's weird to think that like I'm just not an open book across all pages and venues and like everywhere, that not everybody gets the same version, not everybody gets the same shell. And so I was thinking about that as you were saying that, like, it's messy, because it feels kind of incomplete, and like sometimes I'm worried that if I overshare or say too much to some people, that there is judgment attached to it. And part of owning my story and getting more comfortable with that discomfort is letting go of however they react or respond. But it still does not make me any more comfortable sharing certain details with certain people and being okay not telling them the full spectrum of something. A conversation that a friend of mine, we've had this conversation several times, where she reminds me that, like, not everybody is you're going to share stuff, good, bad, ugly, right, wrong, whatever it is. And not everybody gets access to all of you all the time. And it's what you allow and what you feel comfortable, and it's boundaries, right? So share as much as you want to share, but understand that that person on the other end that's receiving that story still doesn't have the full picture. And so it's hard. I have a hard time sometimes letting go of that. I expect people to react a certain way, or I want something from them, or a certain response, or I'm sharing a specific detail with somebody specifically because I know that they're capable of giving me that response or feeling or embrace that I am craving at that moment. But they don't know all the other details of what's going on to get the full picture. And so I have to release that expectation that I have of them, depending on the details that I'm sharing. So that means that I can either share more so that they have a more complete picture and can give more appropriate or like directed responses, or I can just let it be what it is. And I'm becoming more and more okay with that not everybody's going to see all parts of me all the time. And that's part of my story too.
Mm-hmm.
So I got all of that based on you saying that it's messy and sometimes you feel like you can't share when you're still going through something. I think that's beautiful because that's part of the messiness. That's part of writing and rewriting your story. So thank you, Stina, for sharing that and prompting me to share my experiences with that as well. Jenny, what's coming up for you when you think of owning your story?
Linda, I noticed you muted. Or you're unmuted? Was it something you had for Shell?
Oh yeah, I was gonna jump in, but now it's gone. You're good.
Okay, cool. So what comes up for me is I keep asking my clients about the story they are telling about themselves, of who they are. And we get to make this discovery that the stories that I've been keeping and telling myself about myself, and very often it's about what I can and what I cannot do. Those are stories that I carry with me from my childhood or from from some person that I gave away my power to, and I allowed them to write that story for me. So for me, expanding and reclaiming my life is recognizing that I get to let go of those stories. And when I have this idea in my mind, sometimes that's a lie. And I get to recognize it for what it is, and I get to tell myself the truth. I can. I remember, and I know I shared this before, but it was such a clear moment for me when I was looking at my connections sharing and being really comfortable on camera and doing their thing on LinkedIn. And I had this storytelling going on in my mind that I could never do that. I can't do that. And it was the shift of perspective. It was the me changing my story, waking up the next day and telling me that I can. I am that person. I am that person who shares on LinkedIn and who does it my way with my words. And sometimes I get really bold with my clients and I tell them, I give them a news story. You are that person. You are that person who is kind to yourself. You are that person who holds space for your needs and recognizes that that is kindness and not selfishness. That is within our power to write our own story. And it's like every day is the opportunity to do so. This today, and that's really interesting. What am I open to rewrite today? That's super powerful and so interesting. Thank you, Shell.
What are you open to write today? Thank you, Jenny. This makes me think of something that I ask my clients quite a bit as I'm going through their LinkedIn profiles, especially those who are going through a job search, right? They have shared what it is that they're hoping to do more of. They want a certain job. They want to work at a particular company. They want to embrace and embody certain skills and core values. And usually I say something along the lines of, so why don't you? Why aren't you? Why don't you put that out there? Say, if you want this, then say it. If you want to be that, then call yourself that. Like, I encourage my clients and friends, family, pretty much everybody, but specifically for job seekers, to just be their 2.0, 3.0 version of themselves that they want to be, because it's not the if you build it, they will come kind of thing, or like you have to fake it before you make it kind of vibe. It's more like if you believe that you already are, then you are. So rewriting your story is like, what do you want people to know that it's true about you, like, and call yourself that. And the unlearning and rewriting and letting go that you were talking about, for me, that's letting go of old shell, old ways of like attributing and having people know that like or think that that's how I am. And the example that's coming to mind right now is thinking of myself as a people pleaser. And this is a big one for me because I'm working through it like in real time, like all the time. Imposter syndrome is another one. If I always think of myself as a people pleaser, then that's what people are going to see because I am still calling myself that. Even if I'm calling myself a recovering one, I'm still attaching that title, that phrase to who I am. But if I can get away from that and maybe give myself a new descriptor, whatever it is, then I can start to make the shift and own that story and show up as that person. And people pleasing is just one example of something that I'm trying to let go of as part of my narrative. But I think we could all think of examples of things that we have described ourselves as that is old versions of you. And if you're trying to let go of that and you don't want other people to see you as that, then that can no longer be part of your story. So what are you including in your story today? What is true about you right now? Where do you want to be in the future? And start embracing and owning those parts of your story. So thank you, Jenny. That's what was coming in for me.
Thank you. I love that you bring up labels because I remember putting so many labels on myself. And one of them is introversion, that I am such an introverted person. And I get to say today that yes, that is true. And I spent many years exploring that part of me. And I also have extroverted parts that I am still enjoying exploring. So it's really stepping out of the duality of that, thinking that we can only be one thing. I believe that we have everything inside of ourselves. When we look at the psychology of our preferences, then we are always somewhere on the scale, but that means that there are many parts within ourselves that we pull from and that we explore in different situations. So I love the freedom in just like pulling ourselves out of the container and exploring all of us. Thank you for bringing that up, Shel.
I love that story, Jenny, of how, you knew about the introversion and then you started hanging out with people who were very extroverted. And that gave you this sense of this is where I end and they begin. And then in them and being around extroversion, you started to tap into the extroversion within yourself as well. So it's so cool. And when you were originally talking, the thought that just like came and left was that idea, and even Stina, what she was talking about, the idea of with trauma, it's about with trauma, it's about armoring up, and with healing, it's about boundarying up. And that's just like one of the things that kind of came through for me when it comes to entrepreneurship and um, having a story where people can actually relate to you and what your sort of transformation has been so that they can see that if they work with you they can transform as well. There's the 1 minute elevator pitch we hear about a lot. There's an exercise I take clients through where it's like you were like this and then this happened and now you're like this, so what was that? We get that, and then somebody that you worked with, just let somebody come up into your mind, just one, and they were like this and then this happened and then now they're like this. And it could even be somebody like back in kindergarten. It doesn't matter that I sometimes work with people who haven't gotten a client yet, so they don't look like, oh, no, somebody I worked with in this area. It's like, okay, so let's go back. It doesn't matter where it comes from. That has been really, really helpful. And I always teach that stories, what do I say? Facts tell, stories sell. So people want to be connected with us. They want to be connected on an emotional level with us and have something to relate to. And when it comes to relationship marketing, if you lined up a bunch of people that sell the same product or do the same service, you're going to go with the one that you can connect with, the one that you can really relate to their story and pieces, parts of your story, and you can see yourself going through the same transformation. Maybe not exactly in the same way, but they got there, I can too, kind of thing. So those were some of the things that came up for me.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. As you were talking about boundaries and armor. And it's a fine line sometimes of knowing which is which and where your trauma ends and your healing begins. And sometimes we are in flux between the two for quite a while. Because as we peel back the layers of the onion, the layers of the story, as we like heal ourselves and undo things and become better for ourselves and for everybody around us, like sometimes we are presented with the same things again, but it's a different version of the story. It's a different version of the narrative because you've already unpacked that previous layer and now this is a different level. There's different levels to it. So owning your story doesn't necessarily mean that things won't come back around. Like things that you thought you let go of or worked through in the past, like, no, you're doing your work. It doesn't just end. It's continuous. And so the story, no matter how many times you think you've gotten over something or over like the climax or the hump in the narrative, so to speak, like it might come again. You might have another climax. You might have like more mountains and molehills, for lack of taking this to like an outdoor setting than like a storybook setting. But go with me there because that's where my mind went. Like it's not just a straight line. Your story is going to be wavy and spirally and curvy. And it's not just going to be this like, all right, I'm on my healing journey. This is my story. This is who I was. This is who I'm going to be. It's not just a straight shot. So owning your story is still very much like being to accept all parts of you, no matter where you're at. And that just really brings me back to, who coincidentally or not coincidentally, like was unmuting as I was thinking that it was related to what she shared earlier. So
I was like, if I just flash, she'll know when you're ready.
Yeah, and it was perfect timing. So all you.
Well, you brought up people pleasing, and I thought I loved what you said about like when you claim that and you focus on it, then like it just perpetuates. You find more places you're people pleasing when you're looking for it, when you're talking about it. You like it's more nagging to me. And what I have found in learning about my own OCD tendencies is that if I give myself a rule, I give myself a good and a bad, I will fixate on all of the ways that I need to fix that thing. So like if people pleasing is bad and I'm not supposed to please other people, then what happens is like it gets a little overzealous, like it's a little too much. And what happens then is, let's say that a people pleasing behavior that I had in the past, in my past relationship, was I took care of all of the household stuff without being asked, without discussion of roles or responsibilities. I just did all of it. And that's like a common, mom, woman, with kids at home, working husband. Like, I think that a lot of us fall into that type of people pleasing where we're physically laboring, doing all the invisible things. And, that's a way of people pleasing. And nobody's going to ask you to stop doing that, because who wants to ask the person that's doing everything to stop doing everything? Like, none of us would do that. So now in my current relationship, when I have felt compelled to clean up my partner's house, to change the sheets, to throw in a load of laundry, to get some groceries, I'll have this like, oh, but am I going back into my people pleasing? And I'll kind of obsess over, like you said, that fine line between what is this and what is this. And it's like, I've had to like take a step back and go, that's not helping either. Like, it's not helping me to be so like analytical of every decision I make and who, who's, who's balancing the scales, And so I was like, what is it about people pleasing that I like? What is it that draws me into that kind of behavior? I was like, I love to feel generous with people. Like, I love if I have memories in my life of being able to give like a chunk of money to somebody to fix their car, to take a certification, to like do something that they didn't have the funds for. And I loved doing that. Like, it just made me so, so happy. And I never felt owed in those situations. And so what I have started to do is say, like, does this feel generous to me? And will I feel owed if I do this? So like that to me is such a more powerful measure of what actually feels really good to me. What do I want to do? What do I have the capacity to do? And what are some things that, like, if I'm going to feel owed, then that means I need to speak up for my needs right now. So if I'm willing to pick up the groceries for my partner, but I don't have it in my budget to buy all of those groceries, I'll just say, hey, I'm happy to pick up those groceries, but I don't have the extra in my budget this month to do another Costco run, and then it leaves it totally open for them to say, cool, I'll cover it, or, well, me neither, so we'll wait till next month. Like there's that, then we can collaborate and like come up with a solution together. And I don't feel bitter, I don't feel owed. And I still felt generous because I was willing to put in the time and the energy to go do the thing. And that felt good to me. So I've found that with so many different things where, like, even with like boundaries, okay, I need to have good boundaries. What does that mean? Like, how do I want to feel? And am I moving towards that? You know? And I've even found lately that sometimes I want to like stick a flag in the ground and be like, I have a boundary here and I want you to know about it. Like, because I feel disrespected, or I feel like the other person has been inconsiderate, or something has triggered me. And when I take a step back and I'm like, you know what, that still feels defensive. And it feels like I'm still trying to like get the other person to do what I want them to do. And just go, what would be just a completely different approach to this? What would just be something completely different to say? What if I took all the assumptions that I have in this situation and just threw them out the window and just try something totally different? Like, what's the worst that can happen? They'll get mad at me. Well, that's what I'm afraid of anyways, right? Like that's the tension in people pleasing. Well, I don't want them to be mad at me. So if you try something completely different and it totally fails, you learned something. And yeah, so all of the, like, that topic of people pleasing and like finding that line, that's just some of how I have learned recently to be like, oh, am I feeling generous? Am I going to feel owed? And then just kind of like shake things up. Like you said, Shal, like creating those new parts of yourself and not going into those old habits. It feels so weird when you do it sometimes, because it can feel like you're lying. It can feel like you're making something up. Like, this isn't really me, but I'm going to try this other thing and see what happens. I'm like, well, it can be you. You can grow, you can change, and it doesn't matter who you've been or how you've acted in the past. So
Sorry, thought I unmuted myself and then it was still muted as I was taking my deep breath. You can grow and change. I love that. I, um, that's just like the epitome of every conversation that I have had probably in the last year with anybody across the board is communicating that without even saying it. Like, I just want people to be aware that change is possible and we all have that at our fingertips, like at our disposal. We get to make that conscious decision to grow and change and reinvent ourselves however we see fit. So yeah, if you want to think outside the box and reframe the way that you would normally respond by trying it a different way, cool. Test the waters, see what happens. I love that. I love that for you, Stina. I love that. I love hearing other people share their stories of doing things like that. Linda, I see you unmuted. So what's coming in for you?
When it comes to neural pathways, we think that what is on the old neural pathway, we can change that. And we can't. It will always be there. That story will always be there. That way of being will always be there. You can create a new neural pathway. And like Jenny and I have been talking about, is like you have choice. Sometimes it's unconscious and boop, you find yourself over on the old one. But even if you do, it's like stepping in mud that kind of is sucking you down. Do you really want to be over there in the mud that's sucking you down, or do you want to be over here on the new neural pathway where it feels really, really good and freeing? And even though it might feel different and uncomfortable, it's still something that you're seeking at the time. So yeah, there's a big addiction to drama will keep us over on the old neural pathway too.
I have a tickle in my throat. I don't know if that's telling of something. Not a cold, but somebody's energy, maybe from somewhere else. Wow. Addiction could be like a whole different discussion for us, because that's such a rabbit hole for us to go down. And I don't know if that's the time and space for this for today, but like I love where that's going, because that's part of owning our stories too, right? Is like what we're leaning into and what we have tendencies toward and how to break that addiction, so to speak, whether we recognize it or not. I want to wrap up for today. First by asking, is anything else coming in for you ladies before we end on a high vibe note? And if the answer is no, then all good. We will see you next week for another high vibe conversation. We'll be joined by a very special guest. So make sure to stay tuned. Check us out on LinkedIn Live for the replay, on YouTube, on Facebook, wherever you can find us. And make sure to follow along on any of those platforms and connect with us if you're looking for more high vibe conversations. Until next time, we'll say bye for now.